Hello, my name is Xenophon Papadimitris. I'm a professor in radiology and biomedical imaging and biomedical engineering at Yale. This interview is part of a collection of conversations with experts in medical software from academia, industry, and regulatory agencies, and is supplementary material for a Coursera class Introduction to Medical Software that will appear in the fall of 2021. And our guest today is Dr. Andrea Biasiucci. Dr. Biasiucci is an electronic biomedical engineer. He has a PhD in brain-machine interfaces from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. He has more than 10 years of experience in medical devices, innovation, and digital health. He currently leads the competence cluster in clinical evaluation, active implantable medical devices and digital health at Confinis, which is a global regulatory consulting firm based in Switzerland. So with that, Andrea, welcome. Thank you for doing this. So let me ask you to expand first a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit more about you and the company you work for and what you guys do.
Thank you, Xenius. So thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to be talking in this course, and I think it's an excellent way to deliver information to many people and to information of high quality. So as you briefly said, I'm a biomedical engineer by training. I did a PhD in new technologies, or these emerging technologies, where I was using a type of sensor applied to the scalp of people, recording electroencephalographic data, and machine learning to train a machine that could decode thoughts of paralyzed people to drive machines in real-world scenarios and for rehabilitation purposes after stroke, for example, neurological injury. During my PhD time here in Switzerland, I was the founder of a company, a startup company in neurostimulation, non-invasive neurostimulation after stroke. The company is called Intent. It was acquired in 2017. And since the acquisition of my startup, I decided to become a medtech regulatory consultant, and I joined Confinis. Confinis is, as you mentioned, is a regulatory consulting firm based in Switzerland that treats any type of company, from startups to a large corporate, in the topics that are relevant for device manufacturers that need to bring new devices on the market. We mainly work with European clients, but we also have a US branch that is active for the Swiss clients that want to go in the US, but also for the US clients that want to access Switzerland and Europe. We will see that this link may be problematic sometimes.
Okay, thank you. So let's start by sort of, if you give us a brief history of how the European Union medical device, medical software regulations came about. And, we're in the process of having new regulation, which I guess just kicked in post-COVID. So if you just outline a little bit of that, so that a lot of our listeners may be more familiar with what happened in the US and the history there. So let's look at Europe and where we are there.
Yes, absolutely. So in order to trace the history of the medical device regulations, not just the last one, but even the one before that, we should really start at the beginning of the European dream. So uniting a lot of countries that were typically fighting one with the other for throughout centuries, if not more than that. And so the basic idea was to find a way to generate an economic area that was very stable and to give access to a unified market. And in this niche of heavily regulated devices, it was not so easy. You had a lot of national authorities that were creating laws and regulating the market access. And for that reason, there was implementation that in 1993, this became effective, of a medical device directive that was setting some general principles that medical device manufacturers should comply to in order to access a unified market. That was the beginning of an era, and that directive is called the MDD, was called now the Medical Device Directive, 9342. And this, let's say, this period where the directive was regulating the access of any company located in Europe to the market ended with the introduction of a new regulation. So the new regulation is called Medical Device Regulation. It's a law that is valid as of today, as we speak. It was supposed to enter in force in 26th of May 2020. Then, because of COVID, that was postponed from a pretty unique case in the European history that we had a postponement of this type. And we will talk later about the differences between what was new introduced, what the MDR, the medical device regulation, introduced that is new. But I would say that the most important point is that there were several cases that facilitated the introduction of the MDR. Some people say that MDR was born on the let's say on a wave of scandals that was affecting the medical device world. The most known scandal, something that everybody speaks about, is the PIP scandal. It was a French company that was basically manufacturing breast implants, and unfortunately it was a fraud case where these manufacturers decided to use medical grade polymers, consumer grade polymers instead of medical grade polymers, which resulted in a lot of adverse events and very bad things for the health of people that were, of women that were receiving these implants. And for this reason, basically, after this fraud, there was a higher scrutiny on the need for clinical data and clinical evidence for medical devices. That was one of the reasons. But many specialists observed that this was not really a moving event. It was more a facilitator for the public opinion of something that was already ongoing for a long time. Another case of problems with devices that was close to a scandal, but in general it highlights a problem with certain types of devices on the market, was related to some hip implants. So there was a set of hip implants that were, as you know, there are many versions of this type of devices. Mm-hmm. You can change shape, materials, approaches, surgical techniques, you name it. But what was happening in Europe back then, and I'm talking about the early year 2000 until 2010 roughly, was that many manufacturers would access market by claiming equivalence. So we will speak later about how this maps to the 510K, for example, in the US, or other market routes in the US. But in this case, many manufacturers were claiming equivalence to another device that was accessing market by claiming equivalence to another device. So there was a long chain of equivalence. And the problem was that it was so easy to establish an equivalence that while device A may be equivalent to device B and C and D, and so there was a chain of equivalence mm-hmm. claims. When there was a problem with one device on the market, the only one that would get immediately informed, because they were doing some proactive activities, would be the first neighbor. So you would get the device D was realizing there was a problem with device E, so was doing something about it, but probably device C would not know, and no way that device A would know. So this meant that many devices were staying on the market despite of some problems with other devices that were there, and that was a real problem. So there was a scandal that exploded because we had a change in design in some implants that, for the higher performing athletes or people that were very active, they started to make metal on metal for the hip and acetabular cap. This was really the place that was in the hip that makes the joint work well and work smooth. So they basically started to make this metal on metal with cobalt chrome alloys. Unfortunately, they didn't know the effects of cobalt chrome when fretted. And this was a problem that they didn't know would come with these devices because the preclinical testing did not show it. And these very active people would move a lot. This movement would create some friction that was creating some debris that would get into the bloodstream. And cobalt into the bloodstream is a very bad thing because it induces dementia and psychosis. So many people started to report these cases initially uncorrelated from the devices until an orthopedic surgeon actually did it on himself and realized that his cobalt values were very, very high after a psychotic breakdown. And they found out that it was a problem with the device, not with their health. So that was, for example, why in the medical device regulation, the concept of equivalence is highly reduced, it's minimized. And that's one of the key introductions. You see that sometimes problems with devices can change laws and the future of a certain market.
Yeah, which is very similar to how the US regulation came to be also, right? It's a set of crises and problems and mistakes. So let's summarize a little bit. So if you're talking to somebody who's sort of based in the US, when you start looking at the MDR and the related issues in Europe, you hear words like notified body, competent authority, CMARC. Can you sort of briefly orient us as to what these things are and how they map, perhaps what the quasi-equivalents, not exact equivalents, obviously, are to sort of the US regulatory setup?
let's start from the structure of the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
So in the US, you have a single point of contact that both, let's say, so thinking about a pyramid, there is the Congress that generates the high-level acts that are then implemented by other authorities, and the FDA is the central element that binds together the field of medical devices, meaning that they monitor that the access to the market is well performed, is well executed, and they also ensure that the requirements are met. So this is an authority that has the both types of duty. In Europe, the structure is quite different, meaning that we have the European Commission, that is a very high-level transnational organization. Then we have competent authorities that are in every state of the union and that are competent for their own market. So they monitor the market and they ensure that the market is safe, and they take actions whenever there is a problem on the market. And then they have another entity that is, interestingly, a private entity that is a private company, basically, a set of private companies called notified bodies that receive the power jointly from competent authorities and the European Commission to analyze a dossier of devices and release CE marks for certain types of devices. Now, I know this sounds extremely complicated. That's exactly how it is. So basically, the idea is that for certain device types, namely class 1 devices, pure class 1 devices, the manufacturers can claim, can generate a declaration of conformity on their own. So they need to complete. In the medical device regulation, there are 2 annexes that are very important among all. One is the Annex 1 that tells you what are the general safety and performance requirements that you must comply to. And Annex 2 is a list of elements that need to be present in a technical documentation. So for the manufacturers of class 1 devices need to create a technical documentation according to Annex 2 and create basically evidence that they meet the requirements of Annex 1. That's what we call a declaration of conformity. I conform to the general safety and performance requirement of Annex 1. And in class 1, they can do it on their own. So they can just create a technical documentation and say, we conform to that. You can see it in our technical documentation. They can apply a CE mark and go on the market. For class 2A, class 2B, and class 3 devices, which are the other classes of the devices, plus some special class 1 devices that have some special functions like measuring sterile surgical instruments and reusable instruments, you need to ask a notified body to check the technical documentation for you and release a CE mark for you. That's how it works. So you don't interact with the authorities at this type. When you submit your dossier, you start to interact with the authorities at the post-market level, or if there is a problem on the market. That's how Europe is structured. And as you can imagine, the interactions that you may have with entities may be very different than in the US, because you're still talking with the same body in the US, while in Europe you have different actors that you need that have different, let's say, duties and responsibilities. One interesting thing is that notified bodies themselves get audited. So while the notified body will audit companies that want to access the market, notified bodies also receive audits from competent authorities, and they need to show evidence that they did their job, checking that the companies did their job. So it's a chain of responsibility that is very important to understand these mechanisms, because in the professional career of regulatory experts, but also in any innovator in medical device world, you will be, these people will be interfaced with real world issues like this. So notified body needs to have evidence. It's not that they can bypass it and just make a discount. They need to have these pieces, and they need to do their work well to ensure safety of patients. That's at the end the reason why we have all these laws.
So just to summarize for students here, in the United States, before you can put a device to market, you submit an application to the FDA, you get reviewed, and then you get the appropriate mark of conformance with 510K or any of the other processes. In Europe, that application, the dossier goes to a private company which has delegated authority from the appropriate government authorities, and they do the review for you, and then they give you the performance mark, the CE mark, that you can attach your device. Is that a good summary?
It's an excellent summary. So if you want, you can think of a DeNovo in large scale. That depends a lot on the type of device, and that depends a lot on the evidence. But in general, in Europe right now, we're using less and less equivalence. So the 510K route has been highly minimized with the introduction of the new regulation. The DeNovo has been highly increased, and the PMA is still the main way to go for any high risk device.
Okay. So, as we talked a little bit about these processes, let's get into a little bit more detail. So part of this process involves, the company having a quality management system and certification and conformity to standards. Those are all implied by the regulation. I mean, not implied, they're pretty explicitly stated. So if you talk us a little bit about what does it mean? So before you can even access this process, you have to meet certain criteria as a company, which is assume for medical devices means a quality management system, and by implication, a risk management process. So if you talk us a little bit about that process, how does one go about doing that?
In general, the most common way to bring a new device on the market starts from implementing a quality management system. The quality management system is not always required for all device types. For example, we can have cases, the most common is the class 1, where companies are not required to have a certified quality management system. They can have just few processes implemented. Since they work in the medical field, they should have a good management of their company, a good way to develop devices or design development process, change control for the design changes, risk management, post-market surveillance, and some vigilance process to ensure that they communicate to competent authorities correctly. That's the minimum set that even a class 1 device manufacturer should have in place at any time. Nevertheless, for class 2A upwards, so for any device class that is highly risk or more risky than a class 1, the manufacturers are required to have a certified quality management system. Now, the most common, by far, the most common certification scheme used in Europe is the ISO 13485, which is an international harmonized standard for medical device quality management systems. The advantage of using this standard, and in general, the advantage of using any harmonized standard in Europe, is that you can use them as a presumption of conformity to the relevant applicable general safety and performance requirements. And sorry for the students for using all this jargon that is very regulatory quality oriented, but remember that the medical device regulation has this Annex 1 that lists a long list of requirements. You will find there few requirements about these elements that I'm telling you, that I'm describing here. So you would use a certified ISO 13485 certified quality management system to ensure that you can clear some of these elements from the big checklist that you need to have if you want to manufacture a device, very simply. So that's for the part of the quality management system. You would find a similar set of rules in the part 820, so Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulation, part 820. You would find the specification for the quality management system in the US. Now, the US was going towards implementing the ISO 13485, maybe also as a recognized standard. Europe moved away, and now from the basics that was using 13485, ISO 13485 for any submission, now Europe has implemented their own requirements in the medical device regulation text as well for the quality management system, which is creating some additional confusion. But in general, the use of ISO 13485 is still a safe way to meet all the requirements in Europe and be done with the quality management system discussion. This typically happens in interacting with a notified body that has the scope to give certification of the quality management system with ISO 13485. They do a two-stage process where they visit basically the company, and doing this two-stage approach, they will then release a certification for the company quality management system. It's a horizontal certification of the whole company. The CE marking process, on the other hand, is specific for a product and is still performed in Europe by a notified body that would start from the processes that generated the documents that are then inspected. So this is then done, and there is an audit of the documents related to the device. And if the audit is passed, the CE mark is released to the manufacturer and applied on the device. Then, of course, in Europe, it's a single process. It doesn't matter which route you take. I mean, you can choose different annexes of the medical device regulation to test the documentation that you have built. Or, for example, if you're producing large machinery like MRI machines, you may want a notified body to just see that you are testing every machine that you produce with a specific set of documentation. There are some other special cases, but we will not treat in this discussion. So this basically maps quite well to the routes in the US, namely the 510K for equivalence is still used, but not so much, I must say, because the equivalence claim, as we discussed as we discussed already, is treated with caution. The PMA is still so the pre-market authorization. Whenever it requires you to collect data, collect clinical data to demonstrate safety and efficacy of your device, is still done for high-risk devices, mainly the class 3 implantable and active implantable medical devices, and then the DeNovo route for lower-risk devices that do not have any equivalence is now by far the most common route, meaning that you discuss your notified body as if you didn't have any equivalent device on the market. You may have some that we call benchmark devices that describe a technical field, and that's what we use for scientific discussion on the evidence of similar solutions and the benefit of yours.
So just to summarize again for students, so essentially we're talking about a two-step process here. First, the company gets certified by a notified body that it complies in a quality management system. And then the product gets certified so they can enter the market. So first they review the company and then they review the product. So there's often a point of confusion among students. They think that the product is all that matters, and sort of it's eye-opening to them to realize that the company is almost step one here. So I guess let's touch on a couple more topics here before we close. The first, and I have it here in my list here, to talk a little bit about human factors engineering or usability and the regulations. And this is an important area. It's becoming more important as we have, a lot of software, user interface device, and there is some notion that this is becoming increasingly important. So if you can just talk at the high level about what is implied here in this space.
Yes. So there is a history in Europe for medical device manufacturers that have to, they have the responsibility to ensure that ergonomic principles are kept into consideration when designing devices. This comes from the first directive that was active in Europe, the Medical Device Directive, that in 1993 was very vague about the fact that medical device manufacturers should consider potential problems related to the use of the device when putting a device in the market. Then became one of the essential requirements of the Medical Device Directive was to ensure that the risks related to misuse would be minimized, basically. So this is now ported in the medical device regulation, where there, in several points, we have the fact that any device must be suitable for the intended purpose. Within this very general definition, you have all the human factors, because in order to ensure that a device is suitable for the intended purpose, you typically have to consider human factor, and there's no way around it. And there are international standards that we use, like 62366, that are international internationally recognized standards in usability engineering that tell us how we can carry out, among other things, but it tells us how we carry out risk management activities that can help us identify potential problems that could happen, and tell us also how to minimize these problems. So from this perspective, the approach is still quite similar, I think, to the approach in the US, especially regarding this, including these principles in the technical dossier. And the other, I think, important element came from an update of the risk management standard in, the most recent one. And this speaks about understanding and trying to mitigate potential misuse of the device. That's another topic that has become very important in the human factor validation of medical devices. And because, it's very common that certain type of devices that are maybe a bit borderline, where you have many variants, there may be mistakes that really come from the humans that make them. So that's how we we deal with it.
I guess in the year 2021, the other topic we have to touch is this explosion in interest and hype in sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning. And I'm sure you're seeing a lot of these things. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of your clients come in with ideas and techniques from this space. And, you know, what are you seeing? What is sort of the interesting developments going on in this area? What do you see as the problems here? Just, you know, I'm just curious to hear literally what you're seeing and what you're thinking is about this topic.
So thank you for this question, because it's for me. I mean, I come from a technical field that was very close to the machine learning field. During my PhD, I was building machine learning models to decode brain activity. So that's let's say it's my natural environment from the technical perspective. In Europe, I must say that this has generated a lot of confusion, and in confusion there are a lot of gray zones. So where does the confusion come from? We did have for a long time, like everywhere in the world, a very good standard for developing software, the IEC 62304. So this is a standard that tells us how to develop what software development life cycle should look like. So how you develop software. The problem with machine learning is that an AI and deep learning or any other technique that really builds models from data and uses occurrences to generate a decision, but also any avatar, any interactive element. So there are many instances. The problem with all these approaches is that the software that builds models can be perfectly written, and the actual model could fail miserably. So because these two things are completely disjointed. In order to have a machine learning solution that works well, you need to have a good software that does its job and trains the models and then classifies the occurrences, but also excellent data through which you can extract your model and make your decisions. If the data is not good, you would fail. So while in Europe it was clear that even for medical devices, you would have to comply with the 62304 standard for developing software well, there's no guidance on how to develop machine learning well, or models, or machine learning models, or statistics well. So this has generated basically many solutions that are in practice are using machine learning to give some diagnosis, or even to steer therapy that basically are every manufacturer is deciding how to demonstrate safety and efficacy, which in turn is a problem, because you need to discuss with your own notified body your approach and demonstrate that it's valid. So this is somehow lowering the rate at which innovation is happening in Europe in this area. So now there have been a certain number of attempts from the authorities to tackle this this very critical area, because everybody knows that AI is coming and we need to be ready. And then the regulator is trying to catch up with the time. And they released a few years ago the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, that's very important in Europe, which kind of touched the principle that are important for artificial intelligence, because they specified how you should treat the data, what are your scope and limitations when you can treat the data, and they set up some principles in Europe that need to also be harmonized, or need to be in line with the general treaties that are signed in Europe, respecting the human, respecting the autonomy, respecting the will of people. So, of course, including this type of social and philosophical principles into machine learning may not be the simplest element to handle. But nevertheless, there is a very interesting reading that I advise students to go through, which is an opinion of the impact of GDPR on artificial intelligence done by the European Union on itself, which concludes that because of the fact that the GDPR is vague, it doesn't impede AI, because it's vague and open-ended. So it's funny, because they tend to judge it this way, which leaves a lot of interpretation. But I mean, from my personal experience as a technician in this field, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a series of principles that you need to comply to, but there is a lot of freedom to find your own way to do that. Now, this is in general for AI and machine learning. I think there is now also a more important step, which is really for medical device manufacturers that have AI-based solutions. because they will need to discuss with authorities and notified bodies. So their choice on how to demonstrate safety and efficacy, as I was saying, is affected by the fact there's no standardization. So just to close on this, there are a number of working groups working on standards for artificial intelligence, which is very relieving because we may have a standard for artificial intelligence in medical devices soon. And on the other hand, the European regulator has released a draft April 2021, so that's quite recent, an Artificial Intelligence Act that would specify special rules for the artificial intelligence in Europe, following the same principle of all the rest of regulations for medical devices and data management in Europe, that is risk-based. So mainly you would have high-risk solution go to one direction, low-risk solution go to another direction. Mm-hmm. How we make this boundary, that's still a debate, an open debate.
Yeah. No, we're in interesting times when it comes to this topic. It will be
it's exciting.
We will see how it all evolves. I guess one of the misconceptions that here or critiques I have heard of the GDPR, just to touch on one sort of point, there's something called the right to an explanation in GDPR. And if one reads it too carefully or too literally, it's more or less says that you can have algorithm-based decision-making because, of course, you can't explain it other than the most trivial algorithm. Now, obviously, that's not the case, but where is that? How much of an impact do you think? Because obviously, there's no such thing as being able to explain a complicated deep neural network. I mean, you can explain it at a high level, but not, I have 2 million operations. There's no way we'll walk through a flowchart and say, well, this is how the decision came to be. So where is that? Is that a serious issue, or is that more of a point of confusion at this point?
I would say that this is one of the elements where we play with the gray zone, meaning that we would like the world to be black and white, but most of the cases it's a very nuanced palette of colors sometimes even. So the right to an explanation is one of the areas where as the European Union said of itself, it's vague and open-ended, meaning that there is the principle that if you get rejected, for example, let's assume a case that's not medical. You ask for a bank loan and they deny it. You have the right to know why. That's your right. And if it was an artificial intelligence that did it, they should explain that according to their model that is based on these parameters, you fall in the percentile of people that most likely will not pay back. That would be a reasonable explanation in Europe that would fulfill the requirements for you to receive an explanation, which has nothing to do with the technicality of how this is implemented. I wouldn't tell you that you have 3 layers of neurons that are interacting with each other in a deep layer that no one knows what it does. But so from this perspective, it's fairly easy to find a formulation that would meet the right of people to receive an explanation that is based on the data. So we personally, also from the practical cases that I've seen, there is a lot of fear around algorithms because we speak of artificial intelligence. Any technician or any technical person, researcher working on artificial intelligence would tell you that there's not so much intelligence behind that. So it's really let's say more of a mechanism, which is not scary, and it's not scary also to bring solutions of this type to the medical world. It is just tedious and complex sometimes to build dossier that can show safety and efficacy. And it must be everyone working in the medical field needs to keep in mind that the claims they make about their objects, their devices, are the most important things. You can have the same identical object classified as a class 1, but if you make a claim that you do something in a dangerous setting, it could become a class 3 and require 4 years, 5 years, 10 years of work to access the market. So it's really important to know well the regulation, know well what you do, or work with people that can assist you in doing it the right way immediately, not after finding it out on the way, because that's not how it will work.
So I have one last question before we close, which is, as somebody, of course, who grew up in Europe too, we know that Europe is not a country in the sense of the United States, right? There's a European Union, and then there's the UK, and then there's Switzerland, and then there's Norway. So how are all these regulations, like what are you seeing here, especially now with Brexit and the UK going its own way? I hear Switzerland is in an interesting situation. Just a quick summary of what is just getting approval if you're getting European Union conformity, is that sufficient for these countries, or is it their own rules now, and where are we going here?
Yeah. Well, you're right that this is a very interesting point in time that we are living, because so the impact and the ripples of Brexit have been touching a lot of decisions and a lot of strategies in the way the European Union is interacting with countries that may not be complying entirely to the regulations of the Union. So the Brexit case is I think very straightforward. They decided to quit the whole framework, and this led to a number of problems also in the medical device world, where let me make a step back so it's very clear for students as well. When we speak about problems in the medical device world for the access to a unified market, this mainly deals with one concept: is the recognition, the mutual recognition of the declarations of conformities in the different countries. So if I do a declaration of conformity that says my device conforms to the general principle applicable in this country, which can be Germany, it would be automatically recognized in Switzerland or in the UK. Now, UK is out from this, is out of this, so they decided to quit this space. So their declaration conformities are no longer valid in Europe, and the European conformities, declaration conformities, will not be valid in the UK. That would be with the discontinuity at day zero. This is what happened in Switzerland a couple of weeks ago, around three weeks ago. Actually, the introduction of the medical device regulation is the 26th of May 2021. We had a small apocalypse in Switzerland because there was a clash, let's say, because of a mutual recognition agreement that was not signed for some very serious, let's say, points that were not agreed between the European Union that was playing strong and the Switzerland that will never give away some of their rights, especially when it comes to the internal politics. They want, the Swiss people want to be the owners of their own choices. So this led to basically having the mutual recognition agreement expiring. And from one day to another, the declarations of conformities carried out in Switzerland were not recognized anymore in Europe. This means that every manufacturer based in Switzerland with Swiss certificates, EC certificates of the declaration of conformities, was not able to sell in Europe anymore. And we're still trying to find ways to solve this through setting up authorized representatives in Europe, and vice versa. But the Swiss government, in order to avoid the fact that the Swiss people would not receive devices anymore, and that would lead to a problem in supply of medical devices, they extended the automatic recognition of the declaration of conformity inbound, let's say. So here in Switzerland for 1 year, we will still automatically receive declaration of conformity is carried out in Europe here. With UK, the situation was a bit more negotiated, so there was a bit more space for grayscale again. So, but in general, this is going the direction where there will need to be authorized representatives in both areas that mediate basically the market access of devices. So in this case, you just have an entity that is, for example, based in Germany, that has an authorized representative based in the UK, and this authorized representative can sell on behalf of this company in the UK market. And that would be the same for UK companies in Germany. So that's, unfortunately, I mean, it's becoming tedious and complex again. And I'm not talking about the other operators that also are touched, like importers, distributors, that's another, we call them economic operators that are also affected by this. But yeah, that's the political moment we are living. Well, I really hope, personally, I really hope this will end soon and we will go back to a unified market, which is just bringing peace and prosperity. And that's the whole point. So we hope that this can last for another 100 years at least.
So, Andrea, thank you for all of this. Is there anything else that you would like to bring up? I mean, I've asked a bunch of questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to say in conclusion before we close here?
So I would like to just say thank you for the space and time that you have given me. And also a word for the students that I hope that you have seen that the regulatory world and the quality world, they're not so boring after all. I mean, some people may look at these fields as some tedious fields with respect to research and development, for example. But I would say that what I have seen transitioning from academia, high-end research to the regulatory world is that this world is really, really cool, and I really hope that all of you will manage to enter this world and get excited as I am to join this very strategic, very hands-on field that really lets you understand how a device is, even a great idea, is brought into the market and brought to patients efficiently and with safety and efficacy. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for doing